brought to you by Best Movie Ratings. Best Movie Ratings is a one-stop, easy and elegant movie ratings experience. Stop wasting your time on bad movies and download the world's best movie ratings app from the iTunes App Store now.
Hi everyone, this is Ahmed Kremli and welcome to Be Efficient TV. The mission of this web TV show is to boost the efficiency of your business and life through tips and tricks from leading experts. And today I have with me Maria Dayton. She is the CXO, Chief Customer Experience Officer at Transterra Media. Welcome to the show, Maria.
Thanks, Ahmed. Good to have you.
My pleasure. So how did you choose the media sector and what's your background?
I think, right now the media sector is going through a lot of interesting changes. So there's this whole trend towards decentralization of sourcing and also kind of general reductions in advertising revenue. So it's in terms of business, it's a very interesting market for potential disruption. So I think for me, that was kind of my interest. And because I come from more of an activist background, working with like integrated social media campaigns and things like that, I was really on a personal level interested in how kind of groups on the ground and local narratives could influence global narratives. So basically how local journalists and local activist groups could basically get their story told on an international level. So that's where my interest kind of lies.
And is that started mainly with the start of the social media era?
Yes, I was living in Egypt in 2005. So the founders of Transterra, we all met in Egypt in 2006. So it was definitely a dynamic environment in North Africa during that time period, and then also in Europe. So there was a lot of, interest between Facebook and Google and doing a lot of different things with social media. So, I think a lot of what we did came out of that whole process. So.
And what is your background before this company?
So my background before this company is I worked for a few NGOs in Egypt, and then I also was a documentary filmmaker, working kind of producing different documentary films. So, like I said, when I was working on the ground in Egypt with different groups, mostly on Facebook campaigns, and then I realized, we all kind of realized at the same time that it was very difficult to kind of go from the online space into the actual media space. And it took a lot of time to kind of figure out how that transition can take place, especially from a tech perspective. So, and my background is also kind of, like I said, in integrating media with tech. So it became kind of an interest of mine in how to connect these groups on the ground with international media outlets. And it's been quite a journey.
But you are in media, you're very low profile on the internet. Why is that? Very difficult to research you.
Oh, really? I don't know. I guess I tend to be more behind the scenes. Like I was always a producer versus, a broadcast person. I don't normally give a lot of interviews or things like that.
So tell us more about what is Transterra and what is the meaning of the name? How did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, so Transterra means obviously in Latin, across, land. So I think it was kind of, we were trying to kind of allude to this idea of bringing people together and sort of, contributing to global narratives. So essentially we're an online news brokerage. So what we do is we work with networks of global journalists and filmmakers, and we license their content to different outlets. So whether it's CNN, BBC, basically anyone, in any country. So we have 280 media buyers, and we connect them with our networks of around 5,000 global, like I said, journalists and filmmakers. So we have a tech system that we sort of kind of a modified ERP system where we deal with this media, and we basically are a marketplace where we connect people.
How unique is this concept? Like, is it like Reuters, or how unique is this concept?
It's kind of like a more modern version of AP or Reuters. So AP and Reuters, they work with a smaller network of sort of basically journalists that work with them or stringers that work with them. And then they own the content, generally speaking, that those journalists produce. And then they, of course, have a subscription model that they then, work with BBC and CNN and all of these different media outlets. So for us, we're a lot more decentralized. We're a lot more flexible. So we don't require subscriptions. We have a kind of a modified subscription option, but we tend to be a lot more flexible. We allow the journalists all retain their intellectual property. We have different options with licensing. We're basically a lot more flexible and a lot more, in some ways faster. It depends.
And you are focused more on the Middle East. Is it because we have more problems here, or because you want to be focused here?
I think it was a combination of things because, a lot of us, from the original group were based here. And then also much of the interest in terms of news kind of originates from the region. So it kind of was just a perfect storm of kind of chance and opportunity. And actually it's a place of real opportunity in many ways where it's a difficult space to work, but if you can, kind of figure out the model, then there's actually a lot of demand and actually a lot of supply as well. It's just kind of the trick is how to connect those two together.
Tell us more about the model. Like you hire, like how you train those like journalists, and then you sell licensed, like how the process, how it works.
I mean, generally speaking, the easiest way, in that we operate is that we have a website. People can sign on and they can upload any kind of video content that they have, video stories, video packages, and then we'll distribute that content to our buyers for potential sale. But then we also have a subscription model where buyers can work with us, like these large news outlets, and we actually commission stories from our networks on the ground. So it's a combination of things, but generally speaking, we work from our website and from video uploads onto our website. So the ability to upload and to use technology to kind of automate this news space is it actually is new because people don't realize that the technology that typically has been used in the process is quite old. It's a very kind of qualitative editor sitting around deciding on stories. We're trying to kind of bring a more enhanced tech dimension to it and automate the process, speed it up, and really give local people voices, through quantities of scale. So that's really what we're trying to do.
So when a journalist shoot a video, you post all these videos on your website and you put the logo or watermark on it for copyrights, or you just posting samples sometimes on the website and then they will ask you for another content?
It depends. We're still in the process of kind of refining that whole system. Generally speaking, we watermark the video on the website. Sometimes if it's like a full documentary, for example, we do trailers. If it's a short video, then generally we will do that. Sometimes a lot of our work is in story kits, which in terms of the media space are like combinations of different footage types that can be edited together into like a short news story. So that wouldn't really make sense to put on the website, but sometimes we do. It depends on the footage and what it looks like, basically.
What's the nature of your like? Is it only news or like economical stuff, business? What is your main core focus?
We have pretty much everything, but I would say our core is news and different types of documentary. I mean, we definitely don't specialize yet in breaking news because we haven't quite mastered the speed that's needed to cover the stories in the same way that AP or Reuters would, like these kind of very established news wires. So our competitive advantage is really in the deeper stories, the stories that people no longer see on the news, which is kind of an in-depth 5 to 7 minute piece that really gives you insight into what's happening on the ground instead of just 5 protesters were shot today. And that's really what we specialize in and what our focus is on. And also just to clarify in terms of business model, because you asked, the way that we operate is we generally split 70%, 70-30. So we take our brokerage fees 30% and then 70% goes back to the contributor, journalist, filmmaker, activist movement, whatever.
How about the subscription model, how it works?
The subscription model is a little bit different in that it really varies buyer to buyer. And that's one of the lessons that we learned from a business perspective really early on, which is that because this space was so qualitative and kind of editorially focused, we needed to be very flexible in how we set up our operations. Because at first we kind of thought that if we built the technology in the right way, the editors and the outlets would just accept it. And then we kind of realized that we actually had to adapt much more than we originally thought to their process. So what we do now is we basically work with each buyer, we adapt our technology to them, and then basically whatever they want, we sort of meet their needs. So if they want a subscription similar to AP or Reuters, where they pay a certain amount of money, $100,000 for this many stories over this period of time, we can do that. We can do story by story. It's very flexible.
And this is what you call on demand, or this is another service?
That would be on demand. That would be our on-demand kind of modified subscription-based.
So they
model.
pay a monthly fee for a specific amount of content that you provide, the publishers, or how it works?
Basically, but again, it's very flexible. So, I mean, we have a very kind of in-depth working relationship where we go back and forth, and we do obviously, a needs analysis of each buyer and each division within a particular outlet, and then we match according to their needs. So sometimes they're very specific. Sometimes it's almost like ranking news, like, get me an interview with, this person at this time. And then other times it's more general, like we're interested in footage about women in Nigeria. Do you know what I mean? And then we have a lot more flexibility in terms of how we go about sourcing that story. So it really does vary. And that's why there's really a unique opportunity for technology and the role of technology in this space, because there actually is so much variance between buyers and within the marketplace, that technology it's obviously complex and it's a difficult place to maneuver, but if you can do it right, you can definitely achieve a lot more and than maybe what was originally thought.
Tell us more about the process of licensing, how it works. Like, how do you sign a contract with the journalist and then with the publisher, or how this licensing details work?
Yeah, it's also a complex process, because obviously it varies from country to country and where they upload. If they upload, then that is protected through a different kind of licensing arrangement, similar to what you would have on YouTube, except YouTube, of course, you're giving up all of your rights. With us, you're not. So that's kind of the difference. But the licensing agreements are made clear when you upload. If they're dealing with us through on demand, we generally will sign contracts. So it just kind of depends. Some of the contracts are more in depth than others. Some are just very simple, and others would be equivalent to almost an employment contract. So it really just varies based upon the buyer.
And how do you register? How the journalists can register on your site? How it works? How they can, they are most of them freelancers, or like they are your employees, or how what is your model mainly focus on?
I think we're unique in that there's several competitors obviously within this space, and most of them require exclusivity of the networks, and we don't. So we basically will work with anyone at any time. We're very flexible. So basically they would just go to the website, they would create a profile, with basically like what kind of camera do they have, where are they located, what kind of genres or stories are they interested in, sample work. So then we vet them, we go through a process of establishing credibility and verifying them as journalists.
So they are journalists with entrepreneurial spirit?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, in a way, freelancers are already doing this, but I'd like to think that we're making the whole process easier, because basically instead of them, typically the way a freelancer would operate is that you would go out, you would tell a story, and then you would get on the phone and you would call up all of your editors and just, try to kind of sell the story or sell the idea and get money to cover it, whether before or after or during the creation of the story. So it can be very time consuming. So what we really try to do is allow video journalists to do the work that they're great at and let us kind of take on the burden of selling. And because, again, we have technology and we have this whole process where we match and sort of meet the needs, we connect not only journalists to buyers, but we connect stories to buyers. Through our technology, we're able to kind of speed up and create create a system where they can make a lot more money than they would traditionally.
So you think they are making more money comparing with their career in the media as employees?
It's a little bit complicated, because if you take the media space in the Gulf, for example, it's kind of an inflated market because of the need and because of the huge budgets of the Gulf countries. So in that sense, of course we're not paying the same that like Al Jazeera would pay. But for our journalists that we work with regularly and that are able to produce the quality that we need in the time that we need it, they absolutely can make more. There's no doubt about it, because again, because we work on a licensed model, we don't have exclusivity, so we're not selling things. Sometimes we do, but generally speaking, the idea would be is that we would sell in English, to CNN, then we would sell, in German to Deutsche Welle. maybe, even to Chinese television or to Russian television, or, I mean, to any country in the world we can sell. We have connections with, Telemundo in Mexico. I mean, we have 280 buyers. So if normally you would get paid $500 for a video story, they would take, 70% of that, and then we would resell it multiple times.
But it's interesting, like, presenters makes more money here than the US, like example, or you're talking mainly specifically on the journalist?
No, I would say journalists for sure. I mean, we can't compete. That's not really, we are not competing, in a broadcast space, because we are a B2B. So we're not interested in sort of, producing media for consumer consumption right now. We really are, we manage networks for our clients, which are these 280 large media buyers. So that's the space that we're interested in. So we don't really deal with like broadcast or things like that when it comes to, paying salaries that would be broadcast or something like that. So.
Can you take us more deeper in terms of prices, like how much each piece, like, you sell it, so we can have an idea how much the journalist earning?
The thing is, it really varies because, for example, we have freelancers that maybe sell one story a month with us, and
per story, how much?
The average is 700.
5 minutes?
Yeah, $700. But it can go up to, I mean, literally, the sky's the limit. It could be 20,000. It really depends based upon what the content is, how rare it is, the location, the quality of the shooting, all of these different elements. So it really varies. Like on average, I would say 500 to 700. And then, like I said, if we resell and we resell and we resell, then they would get 70%, 70%, 70% of each sale. And we're still working to kind of refine that space. Like right now, we resell, 2 to 3 times, I would say, on average. But it really depends on the quality of the content. And if the quality is great, we can resell it 6, 7 times, So that's something what we're looking to do right now. I mean, that's kind of the trick for us,
so
is to figure out how to scale.
How do you market for your platform?
Mostly online. We work with, we have a marketing department who we work with. Like I said, we're a B2B, so we market directly to our clients. So yeah, we do a lot of different types of outreach.
No, market to find, let's say, journalists. So journalist knows about you.
Okay, all right. So we also have, as part of our marketing department, so what they do is they do a lot of online outreach. They do a lot on Twitter. Twitter is great. We do a lot on Twitter. A lot on LinkedIn, a lot on Facebook, a lot on online forums, that are sort of closed, and that kind of specialize in journalism. I think that would be, we basically, any way we can, personal networks, right now, our focus is on taking the networks that we have and really optimizing them. So we do outreach based upon needs of the buyers, but not, we're not in a full outreach mode right now. Just because we're trying to focus on the networks we have and sort of optimizing and building their capacity.
How do you mentor your army of journalists? Like after they subscribe online, you have like videos online to teach them, or you have like one-on-one courses to train them? How that works?
We would love to create more of that. Like right now, we have a lot of materials that we send back and forth. Once someone creates a profile, we at some point would like to put everything on the website in some sort of integrated curriculum. And we've actually talked to a couple large players like the MIT Media Lab and Coursera, a couple of the different online curriculum development specialists, but we're still in the phase of doing that. We'd like to do that in the next maybe 6 months or so. But right now we just basically disseminate resources either just on an individual level or through our training program. So we have a youth-based training program in 6 different countries in the Middle East right now that we're looking to expand. And in that project, we obviously have, specific training workshops, and the young people come, and then they get mentored from, I would say, mid to high level journalists and filmmakers within their environment. And then it kind of goes forward in that way. It's called Voices for Change.
What is Voices for Change? Tell us more about it.
So Voices for Change was our pioneer project in online training for, well, not just online and in-person training for youth. So it takes place in 6 different countries, and the idea was to connect young, kind of aspiring, media makers, really, storytellers from across the region with people that have the skills and the networks in these outlets. So whether it's NBC, Al Arabiya, Al Jazeera, people that can really kind of help mentor them and to kind of get their stories told. And then we provide them equipment and training, and we're in the 2nd year of the project now. And we have ongoing activities and sort of hubs in Libya, Egypt, Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, and we're working a little bit in Iraq and on the Syrian border and in Lebanon. So,
like, your content, is it including some commentary as a report, or you just shoot scenes and you sell this content? So you are focused on the Arabic market more, Arabic speaking market, or English speaking, or you just like shoot pictures or videos and you sell it to the publishers?
I mean, it really depends. Like I said, when we first started, we thought it would be more standardized. Like we would have, a 5-minute short documentary, and we would sell it to 5 different people. And now we've realized over, the last, 6-7 years that it has to be more flexible. And that's kind of the beauty of technology. And, technology really enables us to reimagine the space and to, reimagine the way media is sourced. And that's what's really interesting, about working in this market, because I think there really is like an opportunity in space and demand to push forward this kind of innovation. So, that's what.
Like, do you provide, let's say, if I come to you and I say that I have a business content or lifestyle content or content different nature from the news, like far from the news, like, do you take it? Do you try to sell it for the content creator?
Yes, we always try to sell it. The question is, what is possible, and it really, really varies. I mean, we got our start on hip hop and LGBT content, which is very random, right? So, the first sales we had was on Turkish hip hop and on, kind of more in-depth stories about different gender-related issues, mostly kind of, kind of a sensitive, photo essay on Mongolian, transgendered prostitutes, for example. Something in-depth and unusual. That's how we kind of started. So we really run the gamut, where we have, quirky and unusual pieces, and then we have, it really does vary. It's hard to say, but we always try, and we're always surprised. Like I said, sometimes, we didn't expect that we would we always joke we corner the hip hop market. If you see any kind of video piece on hip hop, generally speaking, it will be from our networks. And something like that we would have never expected to be popular, but there's certain niches that are sort of unexpected, because again, the way that what happened when all of these large outlets started closing their bureaus is it created this gap in content where people are really hungry for more content. And it seems a little bit, it seems like almost like a contradiction, because you see all of these outlets exploding all over the internet, but it's also reflective of the fact that people want more stories. And even though there's more content coming at you, the in-depth stories that people want, they're still not getting. And you see this in any of the, Pew studies, anything coming out about the media sector. People are consistently disappointed and upset by coverage, and it spans every region, from the US to Europe to the Middle East to Africa. No one is happy with the stories that they're getting. So that's, like I said, it's hard to say, what will actually take off. And there's a lot of surprises, like the rise of Vice, for example, who we work with very closely, who is the fastest growing kind of digital online news service. They got their niche through doing, unusual programming and almost kind of like young male edgy programs, and things that we originally couldn't sell to anyone, Vice would take.
Yeah, usually the content on TV is a bit different than the internet. So you're bridging the gap because you're coming maybe from the internet like era or media.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's that creates another opportunity, because what's possible in the online space is different than what's possible like in broadcast, like you said. So, but at first that might seem strange for people outside of the media industry, but it really presents a great opportunity for those who are interested in diversifying narratives, and kind of getting unusual stories told, like outside of, what you would traditionally see. Because, for example, something that they wouldn't run on CNN, the satellite channel, they will show on CNN online. And what gets even more interesting is when you're talking about different languages, what, for example, what a Russian or Chinese channel would publish in English is very different than what they'll publish in Arabic, or not just in Arabic, but in their local language. So it's an interesting space and opportunity.
Can you tell us more about the types of licensing? Like when you sell, let's say you said $500 for 5 minutes. Is it per one time broadcasted, or like for if you make an agreement for multiple times, or it's based on? Do you have some models based on how many audience will see the content?
It varies. It's not really based on audience content. I mean, it's really based on the buyer traditionally and the region to which the person, is uploading from. So it's generally, if they upload to the website, it's a pretty traditional licensing 70-30 split agreement, right? So they get 70% of the profits. They click what kind of exclusivity they're interested in. So they can click, they only want to offer this in a non-exclusive manner, limited exclusivity, full exclusivity. I mean, they can choose. So based upon what they click on the upload options, becomes the virtual contract, right? In terms of our other networks and how we deal with our larger buyers, then like I said before, it just varies, based upon what they need. Generally speaking, there's not an audience component. It's normally just number of stories over a particular time frame.
How do you protect your journalists, like your sources? Sometimes when you connect this material from our content from this journalist to the publisher, you didn't have cases that the publisher will contact directly the journalist if he's good, and then you lose him?
I mean, we have this issue sometimes, but I mean, it doesn't happen as often as you would think. And I guess from our perspective, what we like to think is that we provide enough of an added value on both the buy and the selling side that it discourages that kind of behavior. And that's what we've seen, right? Is basically it makes more sense for a large news outlet to sustain a good relationship with us over time than to jeopardize it by stealing one or two people. Some of the exceptions, I would say, relate to Syria. This is one exception, and maybe Iraq. There are areas where there are certain journalists that are very, very, very in demand. And in these situations, you have to be a little bit more creative, especially because we do a lot of video content from Syria.
Is it because they are better negotiators, so they try to find who's buying and they go like it's the opposite? The journalist is contacting the publisher directly, not the publisher contacting the journalist. Or which side is contacting the other side?
In extreme examples, actually, like Syria, it's both sides. And that's where you see a difference in the market. Like basically CNN, generally speaking, Nigerian journalists or a country that's not as important, right? You're going to see more interest on the supply side than on the demand side. In a place like Syria, they're willing to put out a lot of effort and time and money to get the story because it's extremely difficult. And that's what people don't often realize, is they often will blame the buyer, like CNN or BBC or any of these large outlets, for not providing the content intentionally, where in reality a lot of the old traditional ways of sourcing video are no longer in place, and it's very difficult to actually get stuff out. So I mean, like I said, you do have to be creative, and generally speaking, like I said, even considering how rare and kind of in demand Syrian content is, we still don't have as many of our networks stolen as you would think. You know what I mean? Like there's still definitely an interest on the part of buyers to keep us happy, which is nice.
No, but don't you think that each channel have their own agenda, and also they filter the type of content that they want to broadcast?
They do, but again, there is a lot of desire. There's a huge demand for video content from Syria, for example. and from Iraq. I mean, there's certain countries that are very highly in demand in certain regions. Now, of course, anything related to ISIS. So we've produced a lot of stories on ISIS. So we have a certain niche market in that, just because we have a lot of people on the ground. So most of the large international outlets don't have people on the ground. Even the large Arab outlets don't. So you'd be surprised. You would think that, Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya or any of these places would have a lot of journalists on the ground, but they don't. For a variety of reasons, whether it's danger or they used to have people there, but they no longer do. Everyone is kind of trying in their own way to reimagine the space, and we're trying to kind of bring our own structure, and process to it.
Is there a bidding on the content sometimes between, like, let's say two channels fights on the content or pay more?
I mean, it can, yes. And like we were originally thinking that this auction mechanism, on our website would actually play a larger role. We haven't seen that as much as maybe we hope to see in the future. I think that we'll try to enhance that a lot. But right now we see a little bit of it. I mean, we typically just go with the highest bidder or the person that we trust more. Typically the highest bidder, obviously.
From your position perspective, you are the CXO, which is the Chief Customer Experience Officer. This is a new position in the business era. Like, what do you do exactly? Explain to the audience.
Yes, I mean, we were searching when we were restructuring our management system. We were kind of trying to like, again, in a way to reimagine, the way that we operate even internally. And because in a startup, everyone's doing everything, we wanted to kind of most closely align titles with what people are actually doing. And for me, I was in charge of the technology, so basically playing a CIO role. But then historically, I've always been sort of involved in organizing our networks of people on the ground and basically dealing with customer service and customer experience, what you would sort of learn to be customer experience. And then also part of the marketing and all of those activities. So ultimately, the CXO role seemed to fit well because it could combine technology, marketing, and customer experience, which kind of, is an umbrella term for all of that. So that's why that's what we eventually.
Are you partner in the company or you're an employee in the company? You have a share from the company?
I have shares in the company, yeah.
Great. How do you advise the new journalists from where to start, like especially the people in the Middle East, journalists in the Middle East? Like, how do you advise them to start their career?
I would advise them to look very critically at the space and see where the gaps are, because it actually, there's a lot going on the ground that's positive, like I have outlined that, but there's also a lot of obviously very negative things going on in the Middle East for journalists. Like, I mean, it's the most dangerous region in the world for journalists. I mean, even as an organization, we've experienced a huge threat. Our networks, we have a lot of problems on a day-to-day basis.
But you are focused on news because maybe there is more money in the news than, let's say, business or other entertainment content or other content, maybe, right?
There's definitely more demand, but the space is also very open. I mean, that's why I said the Middle East is an interesting example because historically the space was so closed and the public space was so restricted across the whole region that there actually is an opportunity for like business news and, all of these different types of journalism. But again, it's because conflict tends to drive the narrative and to kind of drive the international kind of news machine. There's always more focus on that. But I mean, what we would love to see in the future is kind of an expansion of that type of reporting. Like I've talked to a lot of different organizations about funding projects that would sort of help facilitate that. And I know that a lot of the large NGOs that deal with media expression, like IREX, Internews, they work on that. Like a big field is oil and gas. So oil and gas reporting is huge, in terms of trying to get,
it's selling to Discovery channels and such.
And also, yes, cultural heritage is also a big one. I can speak from the Egyptian experience just because I'm very familiar with Egypt. When the revolution happened, all of the big three, which would be like the History Channel, Discovery Channel, these large kind of international documentary channels, they removed all of their people from Egypt. but there was still a huge demand. I mean, we're talking, 400 or 500 documentaries a year. I mean, we're talking a large industry coming out of North Africa, and no one to fill it. And a real desperation almost on the part of international outlets desiring any type of content. And again, you see there's opportunity there. Anytime the demand is great, there's opportunity to reimagine that space. And at first, what you saw, I mean, for people that follow, cultural heritage and travel very closely as it comes to the Middle East, at first you would see reruns, just reruns and reruns and reruns of old content. And then you started to see an opening up, a little bit of breaking with traditional norms and changing space. There was more reality kind of based reporting. There was just more flexibility in how stories were told. And again, that represents an opportunity for everyone, obviously not just for us, but for people on the ground as well, and for the industry, the media industry as a whole in the region. But I also don't want to diminish the risk that a young reporter in the Middle East is one of the most alone people, and even exploited in many ways. Do you know what I mean? It's definitely a space where they need protection, and they need the ability to organize in a way where they can effectively champion their own interest.
But you are out of this area. You're not. I mean, you just buying the content, or you get involved in that area of protection, or you don't, right?
No. We get very involved because it's not only a personal. We really see ourselves as a social enterprise. So we do have a social mission. Obviously we are a for-profit company, but we also see that it's in our interest to protect the networks that we've built. And the problem is in, again, environments like Syria, you have, young people in particular that are very exposed in very dangerous environments where they have very little support. They have, no insurance coverage, no ability to, there's no one they can even call if something happens, So something exciting that I've been working on the tech side is to try to create an ability for them to sort of organize themselves, in particular, and sort of connect them to different advocacy groups in the US and Europe in particular, but even within their own governments. And then also to provide insurance coverage. We're working on an insurance scheme to sort of try to get some kind of insurance to people on the ground, because it's really a problem. I mean, we have, when someone gets injured, it's very difficult even to get people out of the countries. It's quite challenging.
And any plans for safe house, or you provide a place for them to kind of a base for your journalists?
I mean, we'd love to do that. I mean, for right now, it's a question of just resources. I mean, we've been talking to a lot of different actors, a lot of large donors, who might be interested, the big NGOs like IREX, IWPR, the International Wartime and Peace Reporting Organization, anyone that's dealing with the plight of journalists, CPJ, the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, any of these advocacy and sort of protection groups are very interested, but they don't know how to there's definitely these gaps in culture between the hardcore media types, the activists, and then even the activists that involve themselves with media. So it actually can be quite challenging because I can tell you from the CPJ's perspective, right, which is one of the largest advocacy groups, they struggle to get information from the ground, right? I mean, so everyone is struggling to get information about problems that happen, like if a journalist is shot, if a journalist is killed. There's a lot of reliance on social media. But then you also have, situations where the governments, use social media against the activists and against the journalists. So it's definitely a complex space that I think a lot can be done in to support and protect these young journalists. And it has to. I mean, we're definitely experimenting with it. It's something that we feel very strongly about.
So you protect mainly the most active, let's say, journalist who works with you. Not everybody who sign up in the website, you give him an insurance. It's a process that you kind of qualify some of your journalists to be qualified for insurance or other benefits, bonuses or extra stuff.
It's what we're working on right now. I mean, right now looks like it's going to be the most elite of our networks, because we assign a star ranking to people that work with us. So people that, like you said, work with us more often would have a higher priority, or people in conflict regions. But I mean, ultimately, if we can cover it with different resources, then if we can cover the expense, then I would like for it to be everyone. Ideally, I mean, my vision would be to have a network of, companies like ours, and then also large media outlets, NGOs, kind of helping to create an organization that would really, really protect, reporters on the ground, and in particular the Arab reporters, which are, they don't get the same kind of news coverage when they're kidnapped or even killed, for example. There's a lot of focus on the foreign reporters and very, very little coverage on the sacrifices that are being made every day by hundreds of Arab journalists, risking their lives, their families' lives, it's really impressive. It's very humbling, I think, for all of us.
But is it because, what is the passport that he's carrying? That's why, his or her government cares more than the Arab governments, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also who will ransom. Basically the Arab governments are not interested in ransoming for Arab journalists, where in the US and Europe there's a certain amount of activity and interest in ransoming different individuals that are kidnapped. So I think that's part of it. I think there's a lot of things. For me, I think it's also who kind of can penetrate international narratives, right? If you have a Danish journalist that travels to Iraq, for example, and gets kidnapped, just because he's Danish and because he's moving across territory, right, from Europe to the Middle East, even regardless of the fact that he's European, he just has more connections, he has more access to international narratives. People, quote unquote, internationally will just care more. Just because he has a lot more networks than someone who's a pure Arabic speaker, Iraqi, doesn't have a lot of external connections. So when something happens, it's hard for that person to kind of generate the same story that you would generate if you're, an American or European. So it's something that we care really strongly about, and we're working with a network of well-known Arab journalists, famous ones, to try to create this organization, hopefully soon, that will work to bring attention to some of these issues and to the sacrifices that are made of Arab journalists every day.
In the industry, from your experience, whom usually, which nationalities risk more?
The Arabic, for sure, in the Middle East. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, we're very humbled at Transterra to work with the people that we do. Our Arab networks are the most, we're a Lebanese company. Most of our, I'm American, but most of our staff are Lebanese or Palestinian or different types.
How many founders you have, and when you started this company?
There's been a couple different manifestations, because we started originally in Cairo, and then it transitioned to New York, and then it transitioned to Lebanon. So there's been kind of different faces, as we've gone along, and now we're reincorporating again. We had one incorporation in Ireland, we have one in UAE. So it's a little bit complicated in terms of, who was on the original boards versus now. Right now our board is predominantly Lebanese. So, we definitely are an Arab organization incorporated in the Arab world. But again, we draw from global networks. So, we really are a global company, and that's what we aspire to be. But again, most of our work, because we focus on conflict, happens to be in the region. So we're really trying to own that space. And that's why, again, the people we work with tend to be the most threatened, because they're Arab journalists on the ground.
Where is your offices?
Our offices are in Beirut. Yeah, we have our headquarters is in Beirut. And we had an office in Cairo that we closed during kind of a few years ago, during when the instability in downtown kind of increased. And then we were opening an office here in Dubai, which is what I'm doing here. So our main offices are in Dubai and Beirut, and then we have sort of a temporary office in Ireland if we want to use it, but we haven't pursued that.
Do you take any news from Dubai, or it's too stable for you?
We haven't done very much from here, just because we don't produce stories, and I think this is a really important point. Is we really try to stay neutral and be a neutral broker, because we're not sitting there producing content. We do sometimes, we'll help edit or we'll do things like that, but in terms of the vast majority of our operations, they're not production. So we don't drive a narrative, right? So if people came to us with lots of stories about Dubai, we would try to sell them. but we don't have a lot of people coming to us about stories from the Gulf, which is sad because the space is still closed. So again, that's something where if we can get more resources moving forward, then we can try to open up certain areas. Like the Gulf is definitely one where there's a lot of interest. Obviously Asia, China, the Central Caucasus. These are really difficult spaces to sort of access. I mean, we're interested in doing all of it. It just obviously requires, a large amount of resources. So.
Where did you study, and what do you advise? Where do you advise the new journalists to study?
I studied at the American University in Cairo, actually. So.
And before it, you've done some other certifications.
Yeah, no. My undergrad was at Gonzaga University in the United States. It's a Jesuit school, and then a little bit in France. I did a master's in France, and then more graduate work in Cairo.
Why? How did you move to Cairo?
I moved originally with UNDP. I was working on a civil society project. We were actually, I said in terms of mobilizing civil society and groups using technology, that's always been an interest of mine. So I was there working with UNDP on it's called online volunteering program. So kind of organizing NGOs around online databases and kind of helping people share resources based like web design, that kind of thing. So if you're a little NGO in Alexandria, Egypt, and you want a website created, a German web developer who's an online volunteer for the United Nations can help you. So that's what I originally went to Egypt for, and then I got a fellowship at the American University.
But that's a bit far from the media somehow.
It is, but it's also, but ultimately it's about voices, right? It's about networks coming together to tell a story. And I think what a lot of us who are on the ground and working kind of in the online space, maybe not with CNN or BBC, but we were working with Facebook and the internet, bloggers, this kind of thing, is you realize that you had a lot more impact if you could tell your story on using traditional media. And I think for me, on a personal level, this was my interest. I mean, definitely other people at Transterra had different interests. I mean, not like opposed to mine, but, I come from more of an activist tradition. So that's where, for me, it was very important that we work together to really help give voices to I mean, essentially, it's disrupting the marketplace, right? It's about real market disruption and changing a paradigm. Instead of having 1,000 elite journalists telling the story for the world, you have 100,000. And that's really what we want.
You don't require any certification. Like anybody can sell a content, not necessarily like a certified journalist, right?
Anyone can sell content, but definitely we have a pretty rigorous credibility process, like determining credibility process. So we have, like for example, a journalist that would be published in like a large international, with a large international outlet would of course, have priority and would get paid more money, but again, we're open. If someone has amazing footage from the ground in like Somalia and they have no experience, then, amen. I mean, that's the future of news. It's really a question of training. Like right now, what we try to do is really bring people together and to try to bridge these gaps between the cultures of different groups, right? So like the culture of a freelance journalist, the culture of a large editor at a large outlet, right? There's just light years between them. So how do you use technology and bring them together? And then even like, for example, social movements or networks of activists on the ground, how do you bring them together with local journalists to tell their story, right? So that story has some, airtime within global narratives instead of having it dictated solely by European or American channels.
Do you use any softwares that helps in the credibility? Like I hear that some people use GPS, special GPS with the camera to define where is the location. Do you use some of these technologies to enhance the credibility of your publishers?
Yeah, we do all of that. We have a lot of different kind of metadata extraction, GPS. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. We also, like I said, have a large profile that we require the journalists to fill out. We do a vetting process. We vet our journalists sometimes 3 to 4 times. We can be quite rigorous depending upon the buyers and depending upon the locations. Also, yeah, I mean, like we care. I mean, it's very important that the information is credible. So that's something we obviously care a lot about. There's always issues, of course, because you're talking about decentralized networks in places that are very hard to access. So it's something we're still kind of trying to master. But yeah, we care a lot about it.
Tell us more about your other projects or future plans, or you're just focused on the current company?
Oh, you mean for me personally or the company itself?
Personally.
I'm very interested in alternative sourcing. So I love, basically Transterra is about alternative sourcing of media, right? So I'm interested in how different types of sourcing can be decentralized, outside of the media space. I'm also, so that's definitely one. I'm also interested in mobile technology and different types of app creation. Anything that's about bringing networks of people together, I'm very interested in. So
So thinking about like some startups or new ideas to be implemented.
Yeah, definitely like things that would use beacon technology, low infrared Bluetooth, anything that can kind of allow basically people to know more about who's around them at any particular moment, and then also how people move through space, right? So it's really about mobilization. So if you're mobilizing journalists to create alternative sourcing of media, that's one. And I think that it's also an interesting space for these new technologies, right? Like the different types of GPS location, beacon. How do you create a production team, for example, using all of these technologies? It's quite interesting, because right now what you have is you have a cameraman, and historically you'd have 5 or 6 people with that cameraman, maybe multiple cameras. Then it kind of got shrunk down to you have, 1 or 2 people doing all of the jobs, but they still can't do it on the same quality that you can if you have a decentralized team, right? So it's all about how do you solve these problems within the space, and how do you get the best quality content and the best in the fastest period of time,
In the most efficient way.
Absolutely. And also on an activist side, how do you protect? I'm very passionate about figuring out how technology can help protect these networks on the ground, because like I said, like our office has experienced a certain amount of threat, but it's nothing compared to what our networks deal with every day. And the era of journalists in particular, it's very sad from our perspective, because we deal with so many of them.
Because you know them personally, and it's a different, you feel about it in a different way.
No, we know them personally, and we know they basically risk their lives for very little, and it's very sad when
you cannot help as you want to help.
Yes. No, but I think it's also a critical way of mobilizing. Basically, if we're talking about market disruption, right? So how do you go from 5,000 to 100,000 journalists, right? This process is actually very important, because you have to create a network that's cohesive and that can protect itself. And right now, because there's all these different actors that are at times even exploiting, different freelancers on the ground, that you basically have this situation where everyone's kind of getting run off into little enclaves of 100 journalists, 50 journalists, 20 journalists, and there really needs to be an avenue for them to come together.
Maybe you have to focus on. You should focus on security in terms of your new startup. Security for those people that like certain device that helps in identifying the location, or certain thing that you insert in the body or something like that.
I don't know. I don't know about that, but yeah, no. There's definitely a lot that could be done in terms of security for sure, and I think it's a really interesting space, and it's really important. So.
Our show is about efficiency, so we move to the efficiency questions. What is the most important working tools that you use?
You mean in terms of my company or myself personally?
Yourself.
Myself personally, I use Asana. I like Asana on a personal level. I also like Solve 360, which I use with a couple of my other projects. At Transterra, we use...
What is Solve 360?
It's a CRM. It's one of the CRMs. I also like Insightly. There's different elements in each one that I find interesting. And we kind of, based upon the company that we're forming, we sort of use a different tool. We use Salesforce at Transterra, which is a great tool. It's the UX can be a little bit a little bit difficult, but it obviously has a very robust functionality when it comes to sales. Let me think what else. I use Google a lot. Google Calendar.
What is the top 3 apps that you use on your smartphone?
I would say Asana, Google. I would say Google Drive and Gmail. Probably.
Asana new update is amazing.
It's great. I love Asana. Yeah, they do a great job, and they make it. What I love about it, I actually prefer a little bit more complexity in my project management. Like I like Gantt integration and things like this. But what I love about Asana is that you can add people to it and they actually use it.
Yeah, it's very simple. For newbies, very, very simple.
Yeah, it's the only one I've been able to find that newbies will actually use, where I put together these really complex, beautiful project management tools in the past, and it's only me and a few other people, especially like generational divides, older people, like they struggle with it. So Asana is great for everyone.
What does your life and work daily routine look like?
Daily routine. I like to block off as much time. I like to create very structured days. This is what works the best for me. So even things that appear silly, like I block off preparation time for things. Like even for this interview, I would block off, 20 minutes just to review my notes. Like I like to have my whole day scheduled.
And different days, different schedules each day, or like the same procedure applied on every day?
I've done something new recently that I really like, where I keep all of my meetings to one day. So I find that really helpful because I don't have to, because I do a lot of intellectual work that relates to technology, and I struggle between going from that to like a meeting where it's almost a marketing kind of angle. So I noticed that I do much better if I have my like social day, and then I have more of my intellectual day, like my tech day, and then I have like if I'm charting a system or whatever, and then the other would be more of a writing day, because I also do a lot of writing, like grant reports, things like that, project reports. So I usually divide between those 3, and I like to keep them separate. It works best for my brain type, I think.
Are you authoring a book or something, or like blogging?
I don't blog, no, I don't. When I write, I'm mostly writing just for work. I write a lot of like grant proposals, a lot of marketing materials, things like that. So, because we're trying to expand in a lot of different ways. So obviously all of that has to be written up and sort of described. Kind of an in-depth marketing or business plan.
What are your other hobbies?
My other hobbies. I actually I'm very interested in theater. So I do some writing for theater. So that's a hobby. So I like playwriting with groups, like collaborative teams of sort of experimental theater. And that's probably the most specific hobby. Obviously seeing friends and family. And
most important 3 things for success in 3 words.
Success in business.
Life and business, yeah.
I think perseverance. I think that's very important. Because I know I can say for Transterra, we had so many people say that our model was not possible. That it literally was not possible. I mean, basically everyone told us that. So, and I think actually almost all the things that I've worked on in my life since I've been an adult, everyone has said it was impossible. So, and I think you have to persevere beyond that initial pushback. Where if you just accept what people tell you, you'll never achieve anything. I would say persistence and humor and keeping a light heart, because it can be, especially in our work in media, it can be very dark. So if you can't kind of find a way to enjoy yourself or to sort of understand your experience, it would be difficult, And trying to think what else. Persistence, joy. And I think finding the right people. I think you have to find the right people. That's one thing I've learned is like I've become obsessed with HR. I've probably read every book that's related to HR and human resources like for the last 2 years.
Yeah, team is the most important asset.
Oh my gosh, so important. It's something I would have never thought. Like I thought if we had our technology in place and if we had the right editor and if we had the right, all these other things that we had to have, and it turns out it's all about HR. It was something that was very important.
What are the things that you're trying to develop, or habits that you're trying to develop to be more efficient?
I would like to. I have this thing where I sort of have to gear myself up for particular activities, and currently I schedule that. Where there's kind of a 15-minute entry kind of into any activity, and I'd love to find out how to kind of reduce that. And I think I could save maybe an hour or two a day. So it's I could just start something right away and not have to sort of almost sit there and think about it and sort of prepare myself and get my coffee, that whole process. I'd like to shrink it down.
Who's your number one mentor?
Do I just say by name, or is it?
As you like.
Probably a professor I had in college, in grad school. He was in Egypt. He was very instrumental. He's a well-known activist, and he was very important in sort of the way I perceived my life and sort of my future and things like that. So,
your top 3 favorite books?
Not business or
business, non-fiction, as you like.
In terms of business, I really like Riches Within Reach. I find it very interesting. I like, I think it's A Customized Nation. I can't remember. It's about CR. I like, I guess, in terms of The Unbearable Lightness of Being I'm a fan of that book. So that's 2 business books and one artistic book. So
3 people that you're inspired by the most.
Honestly, right now in my life, I think it's changed a lot, but I would say it's these young, I would just lump them together. For me personally, it's these young Arab activists, I would say in Syria and Iraq. I find them infinitely inspiring because they go out every day.
Even with the lack of professionalism that they have, but they are very authentic.
There's this passion, and it's an amazing courage in a way that it's almost irrational in a strange way, irrational courage. But when you get to be around it on a daily basis, it's quite humbling and inspiring, people that really will risk their lives every day for something they believe in, because they believe the story needs to be told, and they're tired of being shut out of international narratives. They want their story to be told, and they're absolutely willing to sacrifice themselves. So I would say that.
Do you follow any routine to sleep?
I've been doing a thing the last year where I try to sleep probably early. I don't so much put a time a bedtime, but I have a very particular wake up time. So I wake up at 6, sometimes at 5:30. So I try to wake up very, very early.
Do you listen to any music when you work?
No, but I do listen to music when I wake up. I have kind of a wake up routine. So, but definitely it distracts me. So no.
The things that makes you really happy.
I love working in collaborative projects on sort of any topic. If it's something that I care about, this gives me energy and it makes me happy. So I guess it would be that. Whether it's a play or, a project or a work or an app or technology, anything that sort of brings people together in an interesting way, then I like it.
Last question, how people can contact you?
I think I am LinkedIn. If they want to add me on LinkedIn, it's pretty easy. Or, my email at Transterra is just my name, Maria at Transterra Media. So it's pretty simple. But LinkedIn's probably the easiest, I would say.
Thank you so much for the great information, Maria.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Be efficient and stay efficient, and see you soon with another leading expert.